In a bustling village nestled in the heart of Rivers State, there lived a woman who had captured the hearts and stomachs of every resident. Her name was Madame Beatrice, and she was known far and wide for her extraordinary cooking. With her generous figure, radiant smile, and skin that seemed to glow like bronze in the afternoon sun, she caught an unforgettable figure in the marketplace. Madame Beatrice's specialty was jollof rice, and the locals swore on their ancestors that no one in all of Rivers State, perhaps in all of Nigeria, could make it quite like she did. Every single day, from dawn until the stars appeared in the evening sky, customers flooded her modest store. The aroma of her cooking wafted through the market streets, traveling so far that people 3 blocks away would suddenly find themselves craving her food with an intensity that surprised even them. "Madame Beatrice, this food is too sweet," the villagers would exclaim, their eyes rolling back in pleasure with each mouthful. She would simply chuckle, her laugh like warm honey, and respond with practiced humility. "God's blessing is in my cooking, nothing more." Even during the slowest market days when other vendors sat idle, swatting flies and counting their meager earnings, Beatrice's store remained packed with eager customers. Some people, gripped by an inexplicable urgency, would spend their last naira just to purchase a single small portion of her rice. They couldn't explain why, but eating her food felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. The other food sellers in the market began to grumble and complain among themselves. "This woman must be using dark magic," one bitter rival hissed. "No ordinary food can taste this extraordinary," another agreed, her voice dripping with suspicion and envy. Yet, despite the whispers and accusations, no one could produce any evidence of wrongdoing. Madame Beatrice was beloved by everyone, from the poorest market sweeper to the wealthiest merchant. Even Chief Okonkwo, the village leader himself, frequented her store, praising her cooking to anyone who would listen. Still, there was something peculiar about Madame Beatrice that those who paid attention began to notice. Despite serving hundreds of plates daily, no one had ever witnessed her eating even a single spoonful of her famous jollof rice. When curious customers questioned this oddity, she would wave them off dismissively and say, "Rice doesn't agree with my stomach. I prefer yam." 2 young women worked as her assistants. Their names were Amina and Chioma. Amina was a quiet, gentle soul who preferred to keep her head down and her thoughts to herself. Chioma, on the other hand, possessed a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity that often got her into trouble. She questioned everything, observed everything, and forgot nothing. One sweltering afternoon, as Chioma scrubbed the enormous cooking pot that Madame Beatrice used to prepare her legendary rice, she noticed something disturbing. Deep crimson stains marked the interior of the pot, resistant to even the most vigorous cleaning. No matter how hard she scrubbed with sand and soap, the reddish marks remained, seeming to be etched into the very metal itself. "Amina, come look at this," Chioma called to her friend, concern creasing her brow. Amina glanced at the stains and shrugged. "It's probably just palm oil that's set into the pot over time. Don't worry yourself over nothing." But Chioma's intuition screamed that something was wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling, especially when she noticed other irregularities. Each morning when she arrived for work, the massive pot would already be hot to the touch, even though neither she nor Amina had lit any fire beneath it. And when Madame Beatrice stirred the rice, Chioma could sometimes hear her employer muttering words under her breath, words in a language Chioma didn't recognize, spoken in a rhythm that felt ancient and unsettling. One evening, after the last customer had departed, and the sun had painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Madame Beatrice turned to her assistants with an unusually bright smile. "You girls have worked hard today. Go home early. I'll clean everything myself tonight. Amina, delighted at the unexpected gift of free time, gathered her belongings and hurried away. But Chioma hesitated. She had noticed this pattern before. On certain nights, always when the moon was approaching fullness, Madame Beatrice would dismiss them early and remain alone in the market. Chioma pretended to leave with Amina, but as soon as her friend had disappeared around the corner, she doubled back and concealed herself behind a stack of empty wooden crates near the store. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited in the gathering darkness. The moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the deserted marketplace. The usual cacophony of voices, laughter, and bargaining had given way to an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a distant dog. After what felt like hours, Chioma saw Madame Beatrice emerge from the stall. The older woman locked the door with deliberate care, lit a small kerosene lamp, and began to hum a melody that made Chioma's skin prickle with goosebumps. The tune was beautiful, yet wrong somehow, like a lullaby sung in a minor key. Chioma peered through a crack in the wooden wall of the stall, and what she witnessed made her blood turn to ice in her veins. Madame Beatrice stood before the enormous black cooking pot, her lips moving rapidly as she chanted words in that same unknown language. Then, with movements that suggested this was a well-practiced ritual, she reached beneath her wrapper and withdrew a soiled menstrual cloth. Without hesitation, she squeezed it over the pot, and drops of dark blood fell into the rice below. The rice began to bubble and darken, though there was no fire beneath the pot. The transformation was unnatural, impossible, terrifying. Chioma gasped involuntarily and immediately clamped her mouth over her mouth, desperate not to make a sound. The smell that rose from the pot was overwhelming, sickeningly sweet, yet somehow magnetic, making her stomach turn even as her mouth watered against her will. She fled into the night, her legs carrying her home on pure instinct, while her mind reeled from what she had witnessed. Sleep was impossible. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had imagined the entire horrific scene. When morning came, Chioma couldn't bring herself to return to work. Her absence was noted immediately. "Madam, where is Chioma?" Amina asked as she arrived at the store. Madame Beatrice's smile never wavered. "Perhaps she went to visit her family in the countryside. Young people are so unpredictable these days." But Amina felt a cold weight settle in her chest. The explanation didn't ring true, and that morning she noticed the pot was already boiling despite no fire having been lit beneath it. Days turned to weeks. People continued to flock to Madame Beatrice's stall in even greater numbers. They laughed, they danced, they spent money they couldn't afford to spend. Some men stopped eating their wives' cooking entirely, claiming it tasted like sand compared to Madame Beatrice's food. Marriages strained, savings evaporated, yet no one could stop themselves from returning again and again. Then the dreams began. Villagers started waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, having dreamed of eating jollof rice. In their dreams, they would be shoveling rice into their mouths with desperate urgency while Madame Beatrice stood over them, her smile wider than should be possible, whispering, "Eat, my child, eat until you are full." Upon waking, they would feel weak and drained, as though something vital had been pulled from them during sleep. Yet, despite their exhaustion, they would find themselves consumed by an overwhelming hunger for Madame Beatrice's cooking, a hunger that felt less like a physical need and more like a spiritual compulsion. Amina began to notice changes in her employer. Madame Beatrice's eyes, which had always been warm and kind, now gleamed with a reddish tint when the sunlight hit them at certain angles. And sometimes, when she stirred the massive pot, Amina thought she could see faces forming in the rice, twisted, anguished faces that seemed to be crying out silently for help. One night, a tremendous storm descended upon the village. Rain hammered the earth like bullets, and thunder shook the walls of every home. Amina tossed and turned, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Then, through the sound of the downpour, she heard it, that same eerie humming she had heard before. She crept to her window and peered out through the sheets of rain. A faint, unnatural light glowed from within Madame Beatrice's store, pulsing like a heartbeat. Fear warred with curiosity in Amina's chest. Finally, curiosity won. She wrapped herself in a cloth and ventured out into the storm, her bare feet splashing through rapidly forming puddles. When she reached the store and looked through the window, the sight that greeted her would haunt her nightmares for years to come. Madame Beatrice stood before the pot with both arms raised toward the ceiling, her head thrown back in ecstasy or agony. Amina couldn't tell which. The crimson cloth glowed in her hands as though it were made of fire rather than fabric. The pot bubbled violently despite having no flame beneath it, and the liquid inside seemed to be alive, reaching upward like grasping fingers. Madame Beatrice's voice rose above the storm. Let them eat and never forget me. Let them hunger for me alone. Amina's sharp intake of breath must have been audible despite the rain because Madame Beatrice's head snapped toward the window with inhuman speed. For one eternal moment, their eyes met. Amina's wide with terror, Madame Beatrice's glowing red with an otherworldly light. Amina turned and ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She didn't stop until she reached her home, where she barricaded herself inside and prayed until sunrise. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the village washed clean and gleaming under a gentle sun. Steam rose from the earth as everything began to dry. And as if nothing unusual had occurred, Madame Beatrice's store opened right on schedule. The sweet, intoxicating aroma of her cooking filled the air once more, and customers lined up as they always did, smiling and chatting as though they hadn't all shared the same nightmarish dreams. But on the wall beside her door, written in what appeared to be palm oil but was far too red, were 3 words that no one could explain. The hunger lives. The village grew quieter in the weeks following Chioma's disappearance, though most people seemed to forget about the young woman entirely after just a few days. The intoxicating smell of Madame Beatrice's cooking made it difficult to focus on anything else, difficult to remember that something might be terribly wrong. Amina tried desperately to stay away from the store, but she found herself drawn back despite her fear. Madame Beatrice treated her with such kindness, always calling her my dear daughter and ensuring she ate well. Sometimes she wondered if she had imagined that stormy night. Perhaps it had been a fever dream, a trick of lightning and shadow. But every evening, as the marketplace emptied and darkness fell, that unnatural light continued to glow from within Madame Beatrice's store. Everything changed when a stranger arrived in the village. His name was Daniel, and he had come from Lagos to visit his uncle who served as the local pastor. Daniel was tall and well-dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to city life. When the aroma from Madame Beatrice's store reached his nostrils, he laughed with delight. "This smell could wake the dead," he exclaimed, following his nose to her store. He purchased a plate and sat down to eat. The moment the first spoonful touched his tongue, his expression transformed. The food tasted impossibly good, so good that for several seconds he forgot his own name, forgot where he was, forgot everything except the explosion of flavor in his mouth. He became a regular customer, visiting the store every single day. Sometimes he would linger just to chat with Madame Beatrice, charmed by her warm manner and quick wit. "You are from Lagos, but your soul is still village," she teased him one afternoon, and he laughed, not knowing how prophetic her words truly were. But Daniel was an observant man, and he soon began to notice peculiarities. The same people appeared at the store day after day, even those who he knew had no money. Some borrowed cash from friends, others sold valuable possessions, all for the sake of purchasing Madame Beatrice's food. And after eating, their eyes would take on a glassy, distant quality, as though they were only half present in their own bodies. One night, Daniel happened to walk past the marketplace late. The stalls should have been dark and abandoned, but he saw a faint glow coming from Madame Beatrice's location. Curious, he moved closer, keeping to the shadows. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, he could see her silhouette. She was humming that strange melody again and stirring her pot in slow, ritualistic circles. The way the lamplight played across the walls and ceiling seemed somehow wrong, creating shapes that looked almost alive. A chill ran down Daniel's spine despite the warm night air. He retreated quietly and went straight to his uncle's house. "Uncle, there's something very wrong with that woman who sells rice." He described what he had seen and felt. The pastor sighed heavily, his face grave. "Many of us have suspected something, but everyone is too frightened to speak openly. Hunger is a powerful force, my son. When people find food that seems to nourish not just their bodies, but their very souls, they become unwilling to question its source." Daniel made a decision. "Then I'll find proof." Over the following days, he watched Madame Beatrice carefully. One evening, he approached Amina when she was alone, drawing water from the village well. "I need to ask you about Chioma," he said gently. "What really happened to her?" Amina's hands trembled, causing water to slush from her bucket. She looked around nervously before whispering. Chioma saw something she wasn't supposed to see. That night, she vanished. Madame Beatrice claims she left to visit family, but I know the truth. She's gone. "What did Chioma see?" Daniel pressed. Amina's eyes filled with tears. "The same thing I saw during the storm. The ritual, the blood, the evil." Daniel's jaw clenched with determination. "Then we'll expose her together." They formulated a plan. When the next full moon arrived, Amina would hide her mobile phone in the store and record everything. Her hands shook violently as she set up the device, tucking it behind a sack of rice where it would have a clear view of the cooking area. That night, Madame Beatrice arrived as usual, humming her haunting melody. She tied her wrapper tightly around her waist, sweat already beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. From beneath the wooden table, she retrieved a small black cloth bundle. Inside was a used menstrual pad, stained dark with old blood. Without a moment's hesitation, her face serene and peaceful, Madame Beatrice squeezed the cloth over the bubbling jollof rice. The blood dripped into the pot, and immediately the rice began to transform, darkening, writhing, releasing that impossibly sweet aroma that had enslaved the entire village. "Feed them," Madame Beatrice whispered, her eyes half closed in rapture. "Feed them and bind them to me forever." Amina, watching from her hiding spot outside, nearly vomited, but she forced herself to remain silent and still until Madame Beatrice finally departed. Then she grabbed the phone and ran through the night to Daniel's uncle's house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When Daniel watched the video, his face went pale. "This is darker than I imagined. We need to show the village elders immediately." The next day, the elders gathered in secret: Chief Okonkwo, Pastor Jeremiah, and 3 of the oldest and most respected men in the community. They watched the video in horrified silence. "Tonight, we end this," Chief Okonkwo declared, his voice hard as stone. That evening, they made their preparations carefully. As midnight approached, they concealed themselves around Madame Beatrice's stall, armed with lanterns and thick sticks. The moon hung full and bright overhead, bathing everything in silver light. Right on schedule, Madame Beatrice emerged from her house and made her way to the stall. She unlocked the door, lit her lamp, and began her ritual. She retrieved the black cloth, began her chanting, and raised the soiled pad over the pot. "Now!" Daniel shouted. The men rushed forward from all directions, surrounding her before she could flee. Madame Beatrice screamed, a sound that was more animal than human, and tried to break through their circle, but they held firm. Chief Okonkwo held up the mobile phone. "We have proof of your wickedness. The whole village will see what you've done." They brought her to the village square, forcing her to carry the enormous pot of cursed rice upon her head. Word spread rapidly, and soon hundreds of villagers emerged from their homes, following the procession. When they saw the video played on a large screen that Daniel had brought from Lagos, gasps and cries of horror rippled through the crowd. "You think you can shame me?" Madame Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with rage and desperation. "Without me, you all starve. You need me." But the villagers, finally freed from the fog that had clouded their minds, began to throw sand and stones, shouting their anger and betrayal. "Evil woman, give us back our peace. What have you done to us?" Tears streamed down Madame Beatrice's face as the reality of her situation sank in. At the village square, her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees, the pot clattering beside her. Chief Okonkwo stood over her, his face stern. "Tell us the truth, all of it." Madame Beatrice sobbed, her shoulders heaving. "I wanted to be the best. I wanted everyone to love my food, to need me, to remember me. So I went to the river goddess at night. She appeared to me and told me that if I fed the people with my own blood, they would hunger for me and me alone. I obeyed her instructions. When Chioma discovered what I was doing, I had no choice. I killed her and offered her body to the river. Please, you must understand. I only wanted to be loved." The crowd erupted in furious shouts. Chief Okonkwo raised his hand for silence. "Madame Beatrice, you are no longer welcome in this village or anywhere in Rivers State. From this moment, you are banished. If you ever return, you will face death. Take nothing with you except your cursed pot. Go, and may whatever gods you serve have mercy on your soul." The men dragged her to the edge of the village, where the road disappeared into thick forest. Madame Beatrice turned one final time, her eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and malevolence. "You can banish me," she said, her voice carrying an eerie certainty. "But you cannot banish hunger. It lives in all of you now. It will always find someone new to feed it." Then she walked into the forest, the pot still balanced on her head, steam rising like smoke from a funeral pyre. Weeks passed. The marketplace returned to its normal rhythms, though a heaviness hung in the air. No one wanted to eat jollof rice anymore. Even the smell of it made people feel nauseous and fearful. Vendors removed it from their menus entirely. But Amina refused to let fear define her future. She opened her own food store, small but clean and bright. She decorated it with flowers and painted it in cheerful colors. "This rice is prepared with love and honesty," she told her first nervous customers. Nothing more, nothing less. Slowly, tentatively, people began to trust her. They watched as she cooked everything in plain sight, using only ordinary ingredients. Her food became popular not through magic or manipulation, but through genuine skill and hard work. Daniel stayed in the village for several more weeks, helping Amina establish her business and repair the spiritual damage that Madame Beatrice had inflicted on the community. When he finally returned to Lagos, he looked back at the marketplace one last time and smiled, satisfied that he had helped save these people from a terrible curse. But late at night, when travelers passed through neighboring towns, some reported seeing a woman selling food by the roadside. She wore a yellow wrapper and called out to passers-by, offering rice with a smell that was both sweet and wrong. When people asked her name, she would smile, that same warm, beautiful smile, and say simply, "You can call me Madame Beatrice."